Welcome to another episode of the Plutus Awards Podcast. Our community is filled with hundreds of stories from creators and entrepreneurs just like you. And through the show, we share these stories of challenges and successes, from bloggers to podcasters to writers, speakers, and more. Today's guest is Whitney Hansen, a financial coach, speaker, and host of the award-winning podcast, The Money Nerds. She joins me for a conversation on the exact moment she realized she needed to put more boundaries around her business, exactly what she did, and the many trickle-down benefits she had. She also talks about how having boundaries is also a way to prevent ourselves from creating our identities solely around our business. Let's dive right into my conversation with Whitney. So let's start off, I guess, at the very beginning when you decided to do this full time. What were your boundaries like back then?
When I first made that transition into full time, my boundaries were not great. If I'm being honest, they were really pretty terrible. So what it looked like was I was taking calls for coaching clients all the time. So to give you some context, my coaching package is 3 months. And with that comes once a month, we meet for an hour. And then every single week, we have 15-minute check-in calls. So I remember at that time when I first made this transition, I was going on a lot of road trips and hiking and just really trying to enjoy my time. And when I noticed something needed to change is when my mom and I were driving. And we're in the middle of like an 8-hour road trip. And I had to pull over looking for service to take a coaching call. And that's the moment where I said, oh, this is insane. This should not be happening. I was taking calls pretty much 7 days a week and through all hours. So the client demographic that I was focusing on was people that work traditional 9-to-5 jobs. So a lot of times I, in my head, told myself they needed nights and weekends. That's what they had to have for coaching to be relevant for them and helpful. And that was such a narrative that I told myself it wasn't true at all. But that's what I was doing 7 days a week, all hours of the day, even on road trips, pulling over to take calls. Do not recommend that, but that's what it looked like.
Right. I've been there, similar, not pulling over on the side of to get service, but something similar. Where do you think these narratives came from?
Yeah, I actually explored that a lot in my own personal life. And I think a lot of it came from, I don't want to blame hustle culture, but I think part of that is very much relevant, where we hear you have to grind all the time in order to make your business grow. And if you are an entrepreneur, it means that you're working 80 hours a week so that you don't work 40 hours for somebody else. And so I think we're told this stuff so much that it's really hard not to internalize that. We immediately think that this is normal. If I want my business to grow, I need to be working 24/7 at the expense of everything else, family time, friend time, my own self-time. So we're told this stuff. And so I think that's part of the issue, is that we do believe that. And I have a hard time with that because part of the time, what I see is that kind of was true for a lot of people. To get to where we are, we really did have to hustle and sacrifice. But I don't think it's at the expense of our life. I think we can find a more healthy boundary while we still hustle and grind and be productive and really efficient. You can still achieve that without killing yourself working 80 hours a week. But I think a lot of it is that hustle culture.
Just so I'm clear, so you were coaching at night and weekends, and then during the day, like the 9-to-5, I guess, hours, what were you doing?
While I was building up my business, I still had my 9-to-5 job. To be very fair, I didn't quit my job until my income replaced my full-time job income. Once that replaced it, I made that transition. So I was taking like calls during work hours on my lunch, that kind of stuff too. Once my income was replaced, then I started to look into sales funnels and marketing and building up a podcast and like a lot of public speaking. I was teaching a lot of in-person workshops. So I was filling all of my day with leads. Anything that could get additional leads to my coaching business, that's what I was spending the time doing.
Okay, so it was a combination of growing your business and then, of course, coaching and other ways to make income.
Yep, exactly.
Got it. And so how long were you into this when you had that instant where you're like taking a call at the side of a road trying to find service?
I'm embarrassed to say this, Sarah. It was a solid 1.5 years into my business. So I was grinding and doing this like crazy lifestyle for 1.5 years and even taking vacations and still taking calls. And it was messy. Would I change it? Yes, I would. I would have very, very clear boundaries of what my work hours are. And I have since evolved that. But yeah, I did that for like 1.5 years before I finally made some changes.
All right. So after you had that aha moment, I guess we can say. What were some of the steps you took to establish more boundaries in your business?
It was kind of an evolution. So, what it looks like today is a little bit different than how I started to get boundaries then. But at that time, it was trying to batch more of my work. So, instead of taking a client call at 11 a.m. and then immediately diving into a podcast episode after that, and then going into email, and then going into blog posts, and then doing your email newsletter, like it was just a nightmare. So, what I tried to do first was just batch my content. Mondays from 9 a.m. to 11 a.m. was all content creation. And then in the evenings, it was all coaching calls. And so that helped a lot of just having that context switching. I don't know if you're familiar with that, but it's where you start working on one task and then something comes up and we dive into another task. And it is so inefficient because it takes a lot longer for our brains to reacquaint with the task we were doing previously. And that's what I was noticing. I was working a lot, but not getting much done. And part of that was because that context switching. So that's the first thing I tried was batching. And I did that for about 6 months and it worked pretty well. And then I had this idea where I said, what if I only did coaching calls Monday through Wednesday and that was it? What would I do with my time if I had Thursdays for content creation? Fridays, I could do a half day and just go, work half the day and then go play and go hike and do all the fun stuff on the side. So that's what I incorporated after that. And I was so scared to try that because I thought for sure my business was going to fail. I thought I was going to lose all my clients. Everyone's going to be so upset with me. They're going to say, your time sucks. Like, I can't get a call at 7 p.m. What the heck is going on? And nobody said a single word. They just booked the times that I offered, and that was it. And so what I learned from that was all of these stories of I have to be available are just things that we tell ourselves. It's actually not true. And that took me a long time to learn, but I have to say my new schedule of Monday through Wednesday coaching calls, it's the best. I have my Fridays. Sometimes I take a half day. Sometimes I don't work at all. And it's been a lot better. It really has been.
I'm interested in the Friday half day because maybe many of our listeners can relate. I can certainly relate, is that it feels almost naughty to take a weekday off.
Yes.
And so if it sounds like it was difficult for you to even do the Monday to Wednesday coaching, how did you give yourself permission really to take that half day off to do hiking or something fun for yourself?
Oh man, that was a tough one too, because I really did think everything was going to burn down and I'd have to go get a normal job. So I was really scared. But when I started to do the half days, what I initially told myself is this is only going to be seasonally. So only in the summer is when I'm going to take these half days. And so I started gearing up for that in the spring, just half day Fridays. And what I learned is that it was actually okay. I was more productive during the week because I knew I had to get my stuff done by that time. And I still give myself the flexibility. There are times where I'm working on a bigger project and I do need to work a Friday full day. That's okay. But I will always give myself the freedom to not have anything on my calendar for that time. So I will always block off half day on Friday. I had to ease into it. And I think as you do this kind of stuff, as you get more control over your schedule, you realize that people don't really need you that much. Like, we're pretty cool, but we're not that cool. People don't need us all of the time. And so that was really helpful, is just easing into it and saying, this is just for a season. I'm just going to test this out and see as a lifestyle experiment if it works.
Okay. Tell me more about the easing into it. Did you actually give yourself a full half day off the first time you blocked it off?
I did not. I didn't. I blocked it off. And I remember that first time where I'm like, yeah, I'm going to get all my stuff done. Everything seemed to pile in at that exact moment. And so immediately I'm like, oh my God, I got to get this back to a sponsorship for the podcast. I have to work on this. And this person needs this information. And so it was not great. It was a lot of stuff that came up. But the more you practice this stuff, the better it gets. And I think a lot of times I forget that law, but basically however much time you give yourself is how long it's going to take. And that's kind of true too. So if you do this and you're like, okay, I'm going to do half day Fridays. This sounds amazing. And you block off your calendar, give yourself a little bit of a buffer. So maybe you need to give yourself an extra hour every Friday. And then after a month, you give yourself a little bit more time. So, okay, now I have an extra hour. Now instead of 9 to 1, I'm 9 to noon. And start to just slowly work on that calendar so that you have some time for you to check in on projects, but it's not an entire day of you standing by email monitoring just in case something comes in.
That's really smart to kind of incrementally increase that time or the boundary that you really want to put in place. What are some other boundaries that you put in place other than just the time and the scheduling in terms of your coaching and other projects?
A lot of the boundaries come down to the way I spend my time. So what I know is I am a natural scroller. I could scroll Instagram and TikTok legit all day long and have a great time. And so I've done it before, right? If I don't have those boundaries, I've seen myself blow through an entire day of getting almost nothing done. So one of the boundaries that I have to do is I have to honor my free time. I really do allow myself to have a little bit of scroll time, but not all day long. That's an important boundary for me so that I have more time to work on the tasks I need to do. So that's one thing, is just really pay attention to how you're spending your current time. And what I find is most people that don't plan their time correctly are feeling like they never have enough time. But when you actually have a calendar and you have everything I've got to get done, I use my Google Calendar. I'll block off literally like 15-minute increments of things I need to get done. And then I'll give myself some free time. It really makes a big difference. So I find that to be very effective, where I will do one day per week. So usually Sunday nights, I have my dry erase board and I will just jot down every single thing I have to do that week. Go to the gym, get my car oil changed, respond to emails, like whatever's on my agenda. I'll write it all down and then I will put right next to it, how long do I think this will take me to accomplish? And so I'm estimating, I'm saying, okay, oil change, I got to drive to and from, might take me an hour and a half. So then I'll block off my calendar an hour and a half to do this. And so I think the more intentional you are with your time, the more time you actually have. And then these half-day Fridays become much more of a reality.
Yeah. I love hearing that you are talking not only about business related tasks, but also life admin tasks. So that's interesting observation that I'm hearing there. Is I'm guilty of this. I don't think of those life admin tasks as actual things. In terms of estimating how long something takes, how did you come up with that? Number one. And number two, how can you ensure that that's an accurate time estimate of the task that you need to do?
Oh, I love this question so much. The first week that I did this, it was completely off. I had some things that were pretty good. Like I knew how long it was going to take to create a podcast audiogram. I had that part in my head and I was pretty accurate with that. But things like checking email, I mean, I was like 30 minutes, an hour and a half. How much time do I actually need? I don't know. And so what I would do is I would put it on my calendar as just a guesstimate. And so I said, okay, 1 hour to check emails. And this is kind of weird, but I would print off my daily Google Calendar. And next to it, I would have my phone and I would time myself. So when I got done with the task, I would write down on my calendar, it took me 20 minutes, not 30. This was only 15 minutes, not this long. And so I started to get a better idea. After 1 week, if you do this, you'll know exactly how long stuff is going to take you. You really will. So you'll be able to estimate much, much better after a solid week.
And in between tasks, I think you alluded to this earlier. Do you leave yourself buffer time?
I do. If it's a solid 6-hour workday, I'll give myself an hour lunch, and 30 minutes of that is eating. 30 minutes of that is meditating, going for a walk, trying to stay calm as much as I can. And then the other time is I will do 2 15-minute breaks in between some sessions. So if I see like, hey, here's a good break, you're just coming off of 3 coaching calls, you'll probably need a little bit of a chill out time, then I'll block it in at that point too.
I'm curious about the benefits. What have you noticed since you've been experimenting with these boundaries?
The first thing is I actually feel happier about my business. I feel like it's not a burden as much. Before, I used to feel like I was working all the time, and some of these things were really generating a great return on my investment. So at some of these, I could see a direct return. I'm making a lot of money. I felt great about it. But other times I felt like I was just working in my business consistently. I never had the time to revisit my sales funnels. I never had the time to reach out to people for sponsorships or collaborations, things that really do move the needle in a coaching business. I felt like I just couldn't do that. And so my business started to feel a little bit heavy. I just was constantly like, God, I created this almost monster that I felt like I always was working in. And so when I started to really honor my time and track my time and be very intentional with my work hours, I started to achieve more and I had more free time. which is the exact opposite of what we think will happen. We think if we're like very diligent with every 30-minute increments that we won't have as much time, but you actually have more time. It's really different. And so that's the first thing that I noticed was just that freeing feeling with my business, and actually making more money was really helpful too.
Yeah, it sounds like there's not that sense of resentment or like, I have to do this, I have to do that, which I assume will lead to a direct effect on I guess, your bottom line, really.
It really does. I think we don't talk nearly enough about the correlation between our mental health and our downtime and increased business revenue and just fulfillment in general. But it is important. I think if you give yourself that freedom to just have fun, creative process, to go to the gym in the middle of the day. That's why we started these businesses, was for freedom. Yet ironically, it takes away so much of our freedom. And so I think that mental health component of giving yourself that downtime and not letting your business control you, it really does increase your revenue. It makes a big, big difference.
Is that true for the revenue in your business?
It was. And I can't say exactly how much of that was attributed to just this and how much of this was doing the legwork and all the prep work for years to get the business going. So it's really hard to quantify how much of that is the case. But what I did notice is that first couple of years of business, it was about $35,000 to $50,000 of income. So it wasn't much. But when I started to really shift the way I spent my time and focus on only the things that matter most, then it started to increase my revenue. And part of that was just by being very intentional with my calendar.
I love that, the focusing on the tasks that are the most important. Do you have a reflection process in terms of figuring out what tasks you should, I guess, eliminate or delegate or do yourself?
Yeah, actually, I do. So every Friday, this is part of my half day Fridays, I will look at all my data. And so what I look at specifically for my business is how many coaching applications did I have? So how many leads did come in for that week? How much blog traffic did I have? Any new email subscribers? I look at my social media growth because it is kind of, there's a little slight correlation there. And I look at podcast downloads. So those are like the 5 core things that I'm looking for in my business. And I track that. And what I can see is if I don't have as many coaching applications, I can look back through and see all my email subscribers. Well, how many new email subscribers came in? Oh, there wasn't very many. That's interesting. Maybe I should shift my focus for the next couple of weeks into building a new lead magnet or a new PDF for people to download or sending more frequent emails. So you can kind of start to see, if you just track this stuff, you see the trend line. You can see what areas you need to improve. And that's really, really helpful. So I think if you just track it and you have that half day Friday, that's part of your process, is to just go through and look at all of your data. You'll start to see what areas you need to focus on more.
Okay, so let's say, for example, like you mentioned, okay, I need to focus on my email list more and maybe back off a little bit on the social media. How does that look from like a logistics perspective? Because if I'm scheduling all the social media and trying to interact, but then now I have to do, let's say, more for my email list, how do I balance that also with the boundaries and all those things?
So the first thing is to look at your social media to see, is that actually correlated with growing your email list? Sometimes we think it is because we heard so-and-so entrepreneur said this, but it's not actually true for your business. So that's the first thing, is to see, where are you spending your time? Is this actually generating the result that you want? Let's say it is, and you're like, yes, social media is working for me. I need to spend more time with social media because it does link to my email list, which generates more revenue for my business. So then you can start to say, in just 1 month, what are you going to accomplish to help you get this email list grown even further? So does that mean I have to post 3 times a day and I have to do a reel? Okay, cool. Put that on your calendar, right? So this is where you're going to work backwards. You take that goal. The goal is more email subscribers. And then you're going to break down the very specific tasks every single day that you can take to build your overall strategy to grow more email subscribers. So that's kind of how I think about this stuff. Like if I have to redo a sales funnel and I know it's just not working because it's not selling courses or it's not generating leads, then I know I've got 1 month to just backtrack into this and make sure I don't give myself more than 1 month, because I get kind of burnout. I just can't personally work on the same task for that long. And so I will, work backwards, put on my calendar, make sure that I'm accomplishing stuff at least every single day towards that goal.
Right. So it sounds like all of these logistics really has to do with like knowing yourself and what you like to work on and how you work best, as well as what will help your business.
Yeah, I think that's a fair assumption. And so many times we try to just replicate what other people are doing without even asking ourselves, do I want to do this? And does this actually fit for my business and my life? Maybe you've got like 4 kids at home and you are the primary caretaker and you're trying to fit a 10-hour workday. Like, that's crazy. That's not going to work for you. Maybe it would, who knows? But if it does, good for you. But most of the time we're trying to just copy other people's systems instead of saying, does this fit my life? Does it actually work for what I'm trying to accomplish?
Hmm. All right. So going back to the benefits, we talked a little bit about the business benefits, and then you had mentioned a little bit about the mental health benefits of it. And so aside from that, have you seen any trickle down benefits in your personal life now that you have these boundaries in place?
I think the biggest trickle down benefit that I have seen is just having that free time to do whatever the heck I want. We were kind of talking about this. It feels guilty and almost like a frivolous thing to be able to just go to the gym in the middle of the day or to take a class, a painting class in the middle of your traditional workday. It feels so wrong, but that's like the benefits of having your own business. You get to control what you do with your time. And so for me, that was one of the coolest things was just being able to take more road trips, to take a hiking trip, to be able to do something in the middle of the day that I never could before. It's one of those things that I think is the greatest part of owning your own business that we lose the fastest usually is that freedom. And so for me, that was the biggest benefit of all this stuff.
And what are some other fun projects that you're doing other than just hiking and going to the gym in the middle of the day?
Oh, yeah, we were talking about this. I like to dabble in experiments of like side hustles and that kind of stuff. So one of that was furniture flipping. So I wanted to try just picking up a new hobby, learning how to redo furniture. Loved it. It was so much fun. That evolved into building a geodome. So I'm doing a glamping site a couple hours away from where I live. And that's one of the things. Like on my Fridays, I'll head up to Cascade and work on building stairs and pathways and a sauna and a deck and all this kind of crazy stuff. My time boundaries have given me the freedom to pursue creative projects that really do bring me a lot of joy.
Yes, and I cannot wait for that to be finished so I can actually visit it because it just sounds
Please come.
amazing.
It's going to be insane. But I think that's one of the things too is sometimes we lose that with our businesses. I don't know if you've gone through this, but for a while I thought my only role is I'm a financial coach and a podcast host and I should spend every single free time I have working on that business. And that's probably good advice if you're just getting something off the ground. But if you're established and you have a system and you're making enough money to support yourself, you're more than just your business. We have all of these like fun side projects that we would love to do that we tend to lose because of that guilt of like I have to be working in my business 24/7. And that was something that I didn't want to really follow. I thought I could have a more interesting life that's fun and fulfilling for my version of it.
Yeah, and that's really interesting. I think this is just speaking from my own experience, and I'm also curious to hear your thoughts, is that when my writing and podcasting was a side hustle, it was an identity outside of my work. And then when it became my work, it then switched to just that as my identity. And so it's a whole new challenge to say, okay, now that this side thing is now my full on identity, or I really identify with much more than I used to, what is something else that kind of needs to fill that space? So for me, it's been gardening. You know, it's like a really cliche pandemic hobby, but that's something that I enjoy so much that I do take time in the middle of the day to go out and water and fertilize and talk to the little seedlings, all those things, right? And that has been something that I personally have been really intentional about because you're right. It can be that you love your business so much that you just want to do it all the time, which is not healthy.
No, it's really not. I'm curious for you too, when you started to pursue gardening as a hobby, which takes a lot of time, I will say I tried. How did you give yourself permission to take on some different side projects that are more soul filling?
So in particular with the gardening, part of it was I had to spend more time because I live in Florida. And so it's hot, it's humid. I grew things at the wrong season. There's bugs all the time. If anybody lives in the South, they will know what I'm talking about. And so I was almost forced to just start Googling, like, how do I get rid of these types of pests? Or am I growing this in the wrong season? So it really was almost I don't want to say mother. Yeah, okay. I guess I can say motherly instinct to save my plants. It sounds
Totally.
as strange as it sounds. And then it just became this really fun thing to see a bell pepper grow on this plant that I grew from seed. It was just a sense of like awe, if that makes sense. So then now I really actually quite enjoy it because it started off as almost I don't want to say a necessity. It started off as something that I was doing and I wanted it to kind of see into fruition, literally.
That's awesome. And is this like evenings, mornings? How often do you have to go out in the garden?
It depends on how many bugs there are.
Totally.
But yeah, so I mean, I guess a lesson here for everybody is to really, I guess, reflect on how much of an identity you're putting in your business, really. And I'm wondering if that really does also correlate with the boundaries and putting all your time and effort into it as well.
I think it does. I really do. I think if you look at that identity that you're associating and what you're making that mean about yourself, sometimes we take on these identities and we immediately assume because we look at other people. So we're always scanning what are other identities doing that are similar to us. So if I'm a podcaster, I'm looking around, what do other podcasters do? Oh, they're spending 5 hours a week on one episode. Oh, shoot, I should be doing the same thing. So we almost inherit those other identities without actually observing, do we want that? And then the time boundaries, man, that's like life is more than work. It really is. I think we so often think that our businesses have to be everything we do, that we forget about the creative projects. We forget that we have families and friends and that we still want to spend more time with them. Most of the time, that's why we went into business. And so I think it's just really important to observe those identities and observe if it fits for your life currently.
Yeah. Now, I don't want to ask if there's something you regret. I'd rather frame it as, is there something you would tell yourself when you first quit your full-time job or as you were thinking about it? What would you tell your past self about in terms of like a question or a guiding sort of direction as you were figuring out all the boundaries and all of those things that you know now?
I'd say the biggest thing would be not to take on too much. I think as entrepreneurs, myself especially, I was really excited about all the different projects and all the different angles that I could take with my business, that I would take on too much, which led to those longer work days in a lot of ways. And so if I were to go back, I would say, hey, just be careful about what you introduce to your business. Everything works. Webinars work. Email sequences work. Social media works, podcasts work, YouTube works. They all work. You don't have to do all of that. Just pick a couple areas that you want to get really good at, and that's going to help your business grow. And it's also going to help you preserve your mental health. And so you're not going to feel so burned out all the time.
Awesome. So Whitney, where can everyone find you and your work online?
The best place is the Money Nerds podcast. So come hang out. You can definitely listen to the episode that Sarah and I did a while back as well. So you can hang out with me on the Money Nerds podcast.
Awesome. We'll make sure to have links to that in the show notes as well as all your social media handles. Again, Whitney, thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thank you, Sarah. I appreciate the time.
I hope you enjoyed today's episode. Let's take a look at some lessons we can learn from my conversation with Whitney. Lesson number 1 is to reflect on your relationship with comparison and hustle culture. As you heard in my conversation with Whitney, part of why she found it really difficult to put boundaries on her business at the very beginning was of these messages of hustle culture, or she was comparing herself to what others were doing. If you are finding yourself having a hard time with boundaries or working 24/7, just take a time to reflect on what is really driving those decisions and behaviors and see how you can change that. Lesson number 2 is nobody really cares if you're not available all the time. Again, Whitney changed her coaching schedule to 3 days a week, and her clients were fine with that. And so unless you're on a deadline or you have to be somewhere at a place or on a Zoom call, nobody really cares if you're not available on a date or even if you need to reschedule. Life happens and people are more than understanding. Lesson number 3 is to experiment with seasonal boundaries. I really love this one, whether you are trying to take a half day off or you're experimenting with a different work schedule. Experimenting with it in seasons is a really great way to kind of trick your brain into thinking that you may be able to achieve it, or in any case, it's an experiment to see what happens, if you like it, if you don't, and what you can change about it in the future. Now, before I let you go, I want to tell you about the Plutus Awards coming in September 23, 2021 in Austin, Texas. The award show is co-hosted by Josal Sihai and Natalie Torres Haddad, and it celebrates excellence in independent financial media. After last year's virtual awards ceremony, the Plutus Awards team is really grateful that we can return in person to present a fun and meaningful event. Nominations for the People's Choice Award are still open. Go to plutusawards.com/nominate to nominate your favorites. And that's it from me. Thank you so much for listening to the Plutus Awards podcast, and I'll catch you on the next episode.